So, for instance, we have a variable result's been declared somewhere, and it is equal to 5 plus 5 times 10. So what would the result be? Now remember, multiplication comes first. So you're going to multiply 5 times 10 is equal to 50, plus 5 is 55. So the result here is 5 plus 50 is 55. Now if you use parentheses to add the 5 plus 5 together, first you'd have a completely different number. You have 100 as an answer. So you can see that understanding this order of operations is extremely important to getting the results that you want. You can also combine strings, and combining strings together, or these combination of letters or glyphs or symbols, or however you'd like to look at it, combining strings is called concatenation. It's smushing, smashing things together as far as strings go. So it's pretty easy to say, I've got a first name, I've got a last name, and I want to use them together. So you just use a plus symbol. Yeah, it's the same plus operator used to add number values, but with strings it just behaves a little differently. And there's an example for you using first name and last name. Now remember, when you combine strings, that a variable is just a container. It can hold any type of data, a string, a number, anything. So when you combine two variables with strings, it's the same as joining two strings like this. Putting them, the variables, or concatenating the variables is exactly the same as adding the literals together, the things in quotes. Totally, completely the same. Now, the weird part is, since JavaScript doesn't really care what kind of data is in a variable, you get weird, not weird, but you have to understand the different types and what happens when you smush or mush or mash these things together. When you put numbers and strings together, or numbers and booleans together, and you concatenate them, you just need to understand what happens. A lot of times you'll find that JavaScript says, hey, I see there's a number there, you probably want to add that number. So it does some automatic type conversion. And knowing a few rules of the road will help you predict the results. So if we have a number of shoes and number of socks in two variables, and you want to add those together, it's pretty straightforward to say the value stored in total items is going to be 6, 2 shoes plus 4 pairs of socks. Instead, because the value in number of shoes is a string, see the quotes around number of shoes? Oh my goodness, it's a string. The JavaScript interpreter will convert the value in the variable number of socks to a string as well, and you end up with the string 24, not what you're expecting. There are a couple ways of preventing this from happening. So when you're mixing strings and numbers, some things can happen that are kind of funny, and to force the issue, you can add a plus sign before a variable, and that will tell JavaScript, if it's at all possible, would you please make this a number? And if you do, at least in this instance, you'll end up with the correct number, which is 6. Another way, a little bit more common way of doing it, is if you use a function, a verb, to convert number of shoes or a string to a number. So the verb is just a command called number, and then you put what you want to convert to a number inside the parentheses. So if the string is just letters and not numbers, you get this weird value called NaN, or not a number, to indicate that you can't turn letters into a number. So a lot of times as you're creating code, you will do error detection and look for things like undefined or undeclared values, or things that are not a number when you're expecting a number. So this NaN thing, not a number, is something to be aware of, and we'll look at in a lot of detail. Now this only occurs when you're adding a number with a string that contains a number. Ooh, it makes my head hurt just to say that sometimes. But if you try and multiply the number of shoes variable with a variable containing a number, shoe price for example, the JavaScript interpreter will convert the string to a number and then multiply it. So it's just this addition thing, and it's mainly because the authors of JavaScript chose the same symbol to concatenate as they did with addition. Be aware of it, and when things start going wrong, you're not getting the values you expect, look and see if you're adding or concatenating the way you want to. Now, if you want to replace what's contained inside a variable, inside a bucket, you just assign a new value to the variable. You can say at the beginning of your program, you've got a score of 0, and later on you can keep adding to your score until you win the game. It's very, 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 very common to update the values of variables. In fact, a variable that doesn't change is called a constant, but that's for another day. So you can have a var or a variable with a score of 0, and you might say, hey, add 100 to the score, or subtract 10, multiply times 10, or divide by 10. You can change your values any way you like. And notice what's interesting here is score is equal to itself plus or minus or values. So you can say something is equal to itself minus or plus a value. A little bit strange to think about because you've got the same variable on both sides of the equation, but you're just saying whatever's on the right hand side, that original value of score plus 100 is now assigned to score on the left hand side. So think about that one, and it will become second nature. So this is so common, adding values to itself as far as variables go, that there are shortcuts developed for a lot of these common tasks. One of the things is, say we want to add a value to a variable, we would say plus equals 10 as an operator. So we're not saying score equals score plus 10, we're saying score plus equals 10. It's a shortcut. You don't have to use it, but it's very, very common. If you start reading other people's code, you'll see this all over the place. You can say, and this is a chart from one of the books, there's a plus equals, minus equals, etc., etc. One of the more common ones is adding a plus plus or minus minus to a variable to increment it or decrement it by 1. Let me show you. So if we take a variable named Franklin and we have another variable named message of hello, we can say and concatenate message equal message plus a blank space plus the name, and you'll see sometimes the plus equals operator working with strings. Let's talk about objects for a second. Now, if you think of an object, you can think of dogs. Objects in JavaScript are like dogs. Believe it or not, if you're a cat person, think of cats, but for right now, let's think about dogs. Cute little puppy dogs. Love little cute little puppy dogs that will sometimes crap on your carpet. Ugh. But if you think of a dog or a car as an object, they all have parts. They all have nouns. A dog has a tail, a car has a horn, and the verbs or actions they can perform are like barking and wagging for the tail of the dog, and a horn might honk, a car might transport. All these different things are objects and nouns and verbs, things that are properties of the object and verbs of the object, or things they can do. So just about everything in JavaScript is an object. A browser window, a document, a string, a number, a date. All these things are objects, and they have properties, and they have methods or verbs. So to go back to our analogy of parts of speech, and to come up with kind of a spiffy chart to think about this, you have English nouns and verbs. In general JavaScript, you have variables and functions. Variables are like nouns. Functions are like verbs. But when you add or attach variables and functions to an object, they're called properties and methods. Now, why they have all these different names and vocabularies, it's just a matter of being precise when you're talking about things. If you have any vocation at all, whether you're a doctor or a bricklayer, you can be very, very precise in your language depending on what you're talking about. Um, and this is just an instance of that. We as web developers, as programmers, need to be precise when we're talking about language. So in English, nouns. In JavaScript, it's called a variable. And when that variable is attached to an object, it becomes a property. Interesting. The same with a verb in English. In JavaScript, it's generally a function. And when it's attached to an object, it becomes a method. What it looks like in English, the parts or the nouns or the variables or the properties are very, very similar. But when you create a method or a function, you just add the parentheses to it in JavaScript, and that shows that it's a method or a function, or what we would normally call a verb in English. The way you work with these things, the way you write them, as far as syntax goes, is we have an object called a dog, and that dog might run. But to attach that verb, that function to the dog, you use this thing called dot syntax. So you'd say dog dot run, open close parentheses. And remember, when you attach a function to an object, it becomes a method. So one of the methods for the dog is run. Now, a dog also might have a property of a tail, that noun. So a dog with a tail, and the tail might wag. Interesting. So we have a dog object, a property of tail, and a method of wag. And you can pile these up and string them together in as much detail as you want, as long as you go from general to specific to more specific. Left to right, go from general to specific to even more specific. So that's generally the way it works. Left to right, general to specific. And you use little dots between the pieces of syntax. This is an instance, though, where you don't want to use spaces between the dot syntax items. Just remember, from an object standpoint, pieces of JavaScript that you want to remember or that you want to reference or you think would be hard to remember, and create a cheat sheet. There are instructions on Blackboard for that. And that's it for this week. We'll do one more video with some exercises to show you how to complete the homework. And if you have any questions, be sure and send me an email or leave a text voice message.